there, it's there.
Yeah.
I knew.
Here we go, we got it. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and admit everybody. Are we ready?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're
Good job,
good.
Schools. All right, admitting now.
Good job, Julie.
Julie, you might want to change your name.
Oh,
Hi, everyone.
Well, don't leave because
I know, I know.
no.
Give it just a second here to make sure everybody's logged in. All right, great. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So today we're gonna have City Attorney Robert Taylor and Skylar Brockernap from the Mayor's Office just provide an overview. This is sort of an informal information session on the ordinance that will come to council next week on Wednesday. The Mayor's proposing. It's a little bit technical, so we thought this would be helpful to have just some background on the ordinance ahead of time before it's posted to the City Council website tomorrow. So that's sort of what this conversation is for. Just to clarify, this is really a background conversation. The information that we talk about today, we can use in your stories, but we're not, we ask that you not directly quote our presenters. If they do say something, so if Sky or Robert Taylor say something today that you would like to use as a direct quote in your story, please reach out to us ahead of time and we'll work with you on that. But really, this is just a time for you guys to ask questions and walk through. I want to make sure, are you guys able to unmute yourselves? Yeah, it looks like it. It's okay. Okay, good. All right. And Sky, you should be able to share your screen on your end. If that's right, and we can go ahead and go through the ordinance. And I'm going to work in the background and we'll have it ready to go, just be sent out to everyone as well after this. So with that,
Okay.
I will pass it over to Sky.
Cody, do you see that?
I can
screen?
see it. Yep,
Okay.
looks good.
All right, so hi everybody, Sky Brockernap, she, her pronouns. I'm a senior policy advisor for Mayor Wheeler. So I'm just gonna walk through this ordinance that will come to council next week, like Cody mentioned. Robert Taylor's here from the city attorney's office to also answer some technical questions. Let me just kind of go through it and then we can start the Q&A. So this is the title of the ordinance. I'm just gonna scroll through, stop me if I'm going too fast. I also tend to speak pretty quickly, so sorry, tell me to slow down.
And I think just to jump in really quick, sorry, Sky, but
Yeah.
This is informal. If you guys have a question, feel free to jump in. We want it to be, not a negative interaction. We want it to be positive, but we want you guys to feel comfortable just to jump in if you have immediate questions. So feel comfortable doing so, muting yourself and jumping right in. Thanks.
Thanks, Cody. Okay, so these are kind of just the first whereas section to kind of let people know why we're making this code change. I think you're all probably aware by this point, but just as some context, House Bill 3115 was passed in 2021 by the state legislature, requiring all county and city jurisdictions in Oregon to be in compliance with this House bill that codifies a lot of what was said in the Martin v. Boise decision on outdoor camping, mostly related to unsheltered homelessness. So this code change that we're making is something we're required to do to be in compliance with state law by July 1st of this year. So a lot of other jurisdictions, all jurisdictions in Oregon are making the same kind of changes. They require us to make reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions within our camping codes. So that's what we're walking through today. Just a little context for everybody. Ours has been reported. It's pretty similar to what Beaverton's proposing, not exactly analogous, but we're also in touch with regional mayors and other jurisdictions that border the city of Portland, just because having a regional approach makes a lot of sense for simplicity and clarity as well. All right, so I'm just going to go through. Oh, looks like Kay has a question.
Yeah, Skylar, thanks. Are you saying that this law is requiring the city to create new restrictions?
Yeah, Robert, you're more eloquent when you talk about it than I am.
Yeah, thanks, Kay. That's a great question. So, if the city is going to enforce regulations related to camping on public property, then the law requires those regulations to be objectively reasonable with respect to the time, place, and manner of those regulations. So that's why the city of Portland, and you'll see a lot of other jurisdictions, are going through this process right now to update their code provisions to make sure that they are objectively reasonable regarding the time, place, and manner of camping.
So just to be clear, the city is creating additional restrictions on tent usage. I'm sorry, I failed to see where the law requires that. Is the argument here that you have to create them? You have to create new ones for them to be objectively reasonable? I think it's just the creating new, more restrictive policies part that I don't, looking at the text of the law, I don't see that being a requirement.
Yeah. The city right now has a code provision on the books that prohibits camping on public property. That law under Martin versus Boise and probably under House Bill 3115 would not be objectively reasonable and enforceable because it's a blanket ban. And so if the city is going to enforce these rules regarding outdoor camping under House Bill 3115, they need to be objectively reasonable with regard to the time, place, and manner. And so that's why the city is creating this new code provision that outlines what those reasonable time, place, manner restrictions are. Because what we have on the books right now, we would be subject to a legal challenge under 3115 and under Martin versus Boise.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, Alex, thanks, Robert.
Yeah, my question was already kind of answered by Robert. I mostly was wondering if the current if how this impacts the current city code that prohibits camping on public property, which I know hasn't really been enforced for some time, but this is going to replace it or amend it. What does that look like in code?
Yeah, so this changes it, but Robert, why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, and you'll see, Alex, when Skylar scrolls down, but it 14A 50.020, that's the existing code provision, so it amends that to provide these time, place, manner regulations.
Got it. Thanks.
Thanks. Emily?
Yes, hi. Apologies if this question's been asked. I'm joining this meeting a little bit late, but I just spoke with the executive director of one of the housing services in the city, and he is worried how a dayside tent ban will overwhelm resources at these types of places. And he wanted to ask the mayor, will these types of places see any government help if all of a sudden they are inundated with an influx of people?
Hi, Emily.
Yeah.
This is Cody with the mayor's office. This is just an informational background session with the mayor's staff and our city attorney. So we'll have a media opportunity next week directly with the mayor if you want to address him directly. I don't know, Skype, if there's any specific you want to touch on with this one?
I can just say, Emily, that I'm meeting with two directors of daytime day centers providers next week, and I think that conversation is ongoing. We're also obviously looking to invest money from the city, from the county, from the SHS dollars into various shelters and services that would accommodate a lot of folks and provide the services they need. But yes, to Cody's point, the mayor will be providing the media opportunity next week.
Okay, thank you.
Courtney?
Yeah, thank you. I don't, speaking of Martin v. Boise, it's my understanding that you can't, essentially sweep people if there's not enough shelter for them. And it seems like there just currently aren't enough shelter beds to accommodate everybody who needs shelter. So I know that's a big question, but can you speak to how this ordinance reconciles with that?
Yeah,
Robert?
thanks, Courtney. So under Martin versus Boise, that case said that if somebody experiencing homelessness has no other place to go in the city, no other shelter or other available place to go in the city, then you cannot criminalize them sleeping outside. But the court then went on to say, even then, people who are camping outside with no other place to go can still be subject to reasonable time, place, manner regulations. So you can have time, place, manner regulations that say where people are not allowed to camp, when they can and can't camp, and how they can engage in that conduct. And because you're still providing them an opportunity to sleep in a public place when they have no other place to go. But the court did hold that time, place, manner regulations are permissible. And that I think is part of the reason why House Bill 3115 requires, consistent with Martin versus Boise, requires city to have objectively reasonable time, place, manner regulations if they're going to regulate sleeping outside.
Thanks, Robert. I think this was the order. Emily, did you have your hand up first? Emily?
Oh, hey, I'm here. I don't have another question.
Oh, okay. Just had your hand up. Sorry.
Oh,
Alex,
sorry
I think
about that.
you're next. No worries.
Yeah, thanks. So to follow up on kind of the question regarding Martin v. Boise, in this situation, where would, I guess two questions. What would the penalties be for folks who are on public property during these times, camping, sitting? And if they're told to relocate and move, if there is no shelter space available, if they're at capacity, where would folks be allowed to go?
And it
Yeah, I
may be
think-
easier too to go through
Yeah.
the ordinance itself, because I think it explains a lot of that in the actual document. Is that
Yeah,
right,
I think-
Sky?
Got it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, thanks, Cody. So Alex, let me just go through quickly, everybody, the time, place, manner restrictions and the enforcement section, and then I think it'll answer some of your questions, and then we can follow up with further questions. All right, so this applies to, so we define camp and campsite, and these are the code changes. You can see the underline and then what's struck out. But involuntarily homeless, that definition there from the law, 3115. So the time restrictions that we have here are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So you would be able to camp at night, obviously, for folks who are sleeping at night, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And then how the place restrictions works are places where you cannot camp any time of the day. So, for example, that includes, you can see pedestrian plazas, public docks, the pedestrian use zone of a sidewalk. So it's kind of that through zone where, people would actually be walking regularly, or, for wheelchair access, a wheelchair could go down the sidewalk on that area. No camping in parks or 250 feet around a preschool, kindergarten, elementary or secondary school or childcare center that's licensed. And then 250 feet around a safe work site, a safe rest village, or a sanctioned camping site. So like the temporary alternative shelter sites that'll come online later this year. Within 250 feet of a lot or parcel containing a construction site. The right of way, so high crash corridors. I think some of you are probably aware we have that emergency declaration for no camping on high crash corridors. So that's codifying that into city code. And then 250 feet of an environmental overlay zone or river natural area, all of these kind of natural areas. And then areas posted no trespassing by city bureaus. So it might be like a water pump station or some infrastructure for a city bureau where they need to keep camping clear. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into manner restrictions and enforcement and then get to everybody's questions. So the manner restrictions are largely analogous to our impact reduction programs matrix. So the point system that I think a lot of you are probably aware of for how we designate, what are the more impactful, encampments for removal. So just those different aspects of that program. So obstructing access to private property or business along, adjacent to a right of way. So ingress or egress, mostly for like fire safety, life safety issues, can't block an entrance or an exit. Starting fires, with combustible material, gas heaters cannot be used, erecting, structures, along public property or public rights of way, digging or excavating the ground like adjacent to infrastructure. We've seen some kind of tunneling done under bridges or infrastructure. And then this is this 6 here is the placing or storing personal belongings kind of around your tent. So like the footprint. So Bend, for example, has like a 12 by 12 footprint, kind of a maximum footprint for a tent and belongings. So this is going to be around a tent or portable shelter. You get that and 10 square feet kind of around that. So for you know, chair, bicycle, other belongings that someone might have. And then also no accumulating or discarding or leaving behind kind of garbage or hazardous materials, bio waste, sewage, drug paraphernalia, syringes, that kinds of things. And then this last clause refers to an inability to assemble, disassemble, sell, or offer to sell or distribute 3 or more bicycles or 2 or more automobiles. So you know, having a lot of bicycle parts or a lot of different bicycles or multiple automobiles and automobile parts that we see sometimes around the city. I'm just gonna go quickly. I know folks will have questions, but we'll just talk about this enforcement piece just so everybody sees it. So the enforcement part of this ordinance is a warning system followed by kind of a third option. So a first warning, a second warning, there are written warnings, and then a subsequent potential violation for a civil or a criminal penalty. So the civil, I think we see here is not more than $100 or imprisonment for a period not to exceed 30 days or both. So the written warnings do not count, for lack of a better word, if they occur less than 24 hours apart. So you can't issue a warning, 2 hours later issue another warning and have that count. They need to be at least 24 hours apart. And for the third subsequent kind of violation that comes with a potential civil or criminal penalty, those if another one happens, kind of like a fourth violation after that, if it's longer than 1 year between that third violation, then it would restart kind of the clock. So I think what's written up there is for folks to read. If I need to make this screen bigger too, let me know, Cody, please, if it's not super visible. But then I also just want to flag, so the Portland Police Bureau would be issuing those warnings and those citations or the criminal penalties. And we've talked to the Portland Police, and then we've also talked to the district attorney as well. So folks might have a question about that. All right, I think Brandon, you're first on my screen with your hand up, so.
Yeah, thank you. Just to kind of follow up on what Mr. Taylor was saying in regards to like what Martin v. Boise says. So given that the city doesn't have enough shelter beds, is that why there is a creation of time and place restrictions? And how does 3115 play into that?
Yeah, Robert, do you want to?
Yeah. And so under Martin versus Boise, in order to enforce against an individual, you need to be able to show that there is an available shelter space for that individual. There are shelters in the city. There's also the Safe Rest Villages. There's the new temporary alternative shelters that the mayor's office has been working on. So there is an effort to sort of build capacity within that system. to provide folks an alternative place to go. But if they do not have an alternative place to go, then the city still can regulate the time, place, and manner by which they camp outdoors. And that is the purpose of this ordinance, is to provide those time, place, manner rules for folks so they can know how to follow the law.
Yeah, and just to kind of rephrase that, if Portland did have enough shelter beds, could the current ordinance stand in Martin v. Boise?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Adrian?
Hi there. A couple of questions. First, if we look at, like, I guess, repeat offenders, for lack of a better word, so if somebody gets those 2 warnings and then they're in jail for 30 days and then they get out and they continue to like violate the ordinance, are they just going to keep getting re-jailed for 30 days? What's like how does it all work for people who just aren't going to comply with this, even after getting the penalties?
Yeah, so I can just speak to how I understand it, but Robert, please correct me or add on. So within that 1 year, like I mentioned, that like 4th penalty, kind of after you had the 3rd, it doesn't restart the clock until it's a year later.
Okay.
So yes, so I do also kind of want to emphasize, I think a lot of you are probably aware, but a lot of these types of violations, we work obviously with the DA's office, and people are, instead referred to community service or treatment, or other options as well. So it's not only these 2 options that are written kind of in the code, but that's more of the DA's and Multnomah County's purview.
Okay. And then my other question was, I know Robert kind of mentioned, how folks who are, in areas that would be camping in areas that would be breaking the rules would be, made aware of the different shelter sites. I guess what's that going to look like? Is that going to be like PPB referring them? Are there going to be other outreach workers who are there when, police are issuing citations? What would kind of a situation look like?
Yeah, great question. And I will just say we need to change this code, but the enforcement piece of this will be phased in with a lot of education for outreach workers, folks on the ground, PPB, anyone kind of involved. So it will definitely be an iterative process and an educational process and a phased in process. So we're not flipping a light switch and expecting people to understand or, find shelters on their own kind of situation. So it will be, referrals are done by outreach workers. Police can always call outreach workers to come to a specific site and refer folks and offer different services. But those, Multnomah County, the state and the city are all working together to increase the level of outreach and hire more outreach workers as well. So working together, all of those folks will need to meet with us and to work through kind of, we are right now, like talk through the code and the different changes, and understand kind of the regional differences if there are slight differences as well.
Got it. And just clarifying, so for people who, break the rule, violate the ordinance a 4th time, instead of going back to jail, they're kind of given, they're put in, you work with the DA's office and get them into different programs, I guess. I guess kind of just clarify that one more time, please.
Yeah, so what we will do is just adhere to this code, which is the 4th violation would either be the civil or criminal penalty. It's under the DA's purview, and that's why we've had those conversations to determine kind of how they choose to charge that and whether that referral process. We're also working with the county and with the DA's office on a diversion program that's kind of separate but adjacent to this work. So there's just kind of a lot of different pieces, but yes, I think in practice, there's a lot of different options that could occur for folks.
Okay. So the 4th offense that gets, okay, no, I get it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Kate?
Thanks. I have handful of questions for you. So looking at that list of where people can't camp, where can people camp? That seems pretty expansive.
Yeah, so, I mean, anywhere else, basically in the city, that's not on that list, so we have to provide those restrictions. Obviously, we have the feet barrier, so kind of outside of that 250 feet. Order,
But not on a park, not on a sidewalk, not near a river, not near a school, not near an existing sanctioned campsite, nowhere near a street. Anything posted no trespassing by the city. I don't understand, like, what does that leave, I guess? Do y'all have any ideas of what is left over off the top of your head?
You know, Kay, when you said nowhere near a street, it's the provision is in the public right of way along a high crash network street and intersection identified by PBOT. And so they have a map that shows where those high crash network streets are. And it's represents 8% of the streets in the city, and it's where 50% of the fatalities happen. And so if it's not along those streets, not on a sidewalk, but in other public places, so long as they're not close to those specific areas that are listed, then folks can camp there consistent with this ordinance. And again, like Skylar was talking about, I think a lot of this is, especially in the early stages, going to be about educating folks about what these new requirements are and what the new policy is.
So the city has a map that it's prepared to circulate that shows where people can camp in compliance with the ordinance?
The map I was referring to was the high crash network street map, because I think that was when you were referring to can't camp near any street. That's the ordinance as it's drafted now is narrower than that, and it really calls out those high crash network streets.
Okay. So, but the city does or does not have a map that it's prepared to circulate of what would be an acceptable place to put up a tent after 8 p.m.
not right now, but if it's something that we think needs to be part of that education process, that will certainly be a part of it. This is the first, we just need to change this code to get in compliance, and then it will be an education process kind of throughout the summer.
Okay, a couple more follow-ups for you. How will the city verify who is involuntarily homeless? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so here, let me take you back to the definition. So if someone doesn't have a means of acquiring their own shelter or does not have access to shelter or an alternative option for housing, so kind of like I mentioned before with that referral process, we'll offer folks kind of different options that we have available that day. What's envisioned through the governor's MAC group, the multi-agency coordination group that is hosted by the county, that the city is also a part of and providers are also a part of, is having for lack of a better word, buffet of options or menu of options for folks, and any given day, whether that's congregate shelter or a safe rest village or a voucher for housing. There's been significant investment through the all-in plan, through the county chair's housing Multnomah Now, and then just through various efforts, as well as the city's kind of shelter sites that we've invested in. So offering those folks that shelter, but being offered that shelter, and then to those who are involuntarily homeless, if somebody declines that shelter, then they would be voluntarily homeless, is my understanding from the law.
Okay, understood. Sorry, I'm looking at my list of questions here. So the current policy, like you said, is essentially unenforceable because of Martin v. Boise. House Bill 3115 was introduced partially to address the currently very high rate at which homeless people face civil and criminal penalties. The city is using this opportunity to create a law that introduces enforceable civil and criminal penalties. why take that route rather than just replacing the blanket ban with one that factors criteria similar to that used by the impact reduction program and doesn't create a new fast track to get homeless people into legal trouble?
Yeah, so we did factor in the impact reduction programs matrix basically into the city code. So with that in mind, precisely, but every ordinance has an enforcement mechanism in city code. And so that's why we set up that warning system. And then also gave kind of discretion and talked to the DA about the different routes for other folks to get into programs or into treatment or into shelter housing as well.
Okay, and then my last question for you. Will there be any exceptions to the 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. tent ban?
Well, I mean, I would just say in practice, I don't think anyone's gonna tell someone that at 8:01, you know, I think it will definitely have a buffer. Practically, frankly, we also only have, you know, so many police officers, so folks are definitely being pulled in a lot of different directions in terms of enforcement. But I think this is also, like we mentioned earlier, iterative, and I think all these jurisdictions will learn a lot about what makes sense in terms of time, place, and manner restrictions. This is our best guess at kind of the objectively reasonable legal standard for this jurisdiction, but I think we will learn and ourselves kind of as we engage with folks even more in the education process and kind of phase it in. So right now, that's what the time restrictions are. I think practically, you know, it will be educational opportunity for folks to kind of understand that it won't be camping during the day, won't be acceptable under the city code.
Okay. I mean, I'm not talking about a buffer, right? Let's say it's noon. Will there be anyone who is considered to be an exception to the 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. tent ban if there's a cop available, if, you know, after y'all are done, I guess, with this kind of iterative learning process and developing this policy? I mean, like, is the city maintaining that there isn't a single instance in which this ban isn't objectively reasonable, say for people with physical disabilities, mental disabilities, elderly folks? I mean, what is it, you know, has that been factored in, that some people physically aren't capable of packing and unpacking their tent every single day?
Yeah, okay, I think it has, and I had a conversation with providers last week, and that was one of our discussion points, and also why I'm meeting with a lot of folks who work at the day centers, kind of in Portland, that serve a lot of those folks. So definitely part of the discussion. I think our objective is to get as many folks who are elderly and have disabilities into shelter and housing. So that's our current push, and to make sure folks are offered those opportunities. So working with Northwest Pilot Project, for example, Blanchet House with their day center, but Northwest Pilot Project specifically gets kind of elderly folks. And so we've been in conversations with them and their executive director as well. But I think it's an excellent point. And definitely one that's being considered.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Want to go to
Shane?
Shane?
Hi there. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Hey, Sky, would you be able to scroll down on the proposed ordinance here to get to the IRP sections, impact
Oh, yeah.
program sections? So just, I mean, looking at these prohibited activities within a camp, where we're talking about starting or maintaining any fire for the purpose of burning any combustible material or use a gas heater in and around a campsite. So these are activities, help me understand this. These are currently activities that are not allowed in camps, technically speaking. Is that correct?
Robert, does the current city code speak to, I don't know if it's replacing.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, I think we're all aware that fires, both warming fires and other fires, are a common feature of encampments around the city of Portland and have been for quite some time. But if this is explicitly called out in a prohibited activity, then that means that having a fire for warming or otherwise would suddenly be liable to civil or criminal penalties. Are we understanding that correctly?
Yes,
Robert,
Shane.
did you want?
Yes, Shane, you are reading that correctly, and folks would also, before you get to the criminal penalty under the ordinance, there's the process for 2 warnings,
Correct.
and
Right, so I just want to be clear that, so like, in the winter time, when there are people camping out at night and it's cold outside, after 2 warnings for having a fire of some kind at their camp, any police officer in the city of Portland can come to an individual, start fining them, and then potentially have a criminal penalty that could put them in jail for 30 days. That's what this ordinance says. Is that correct?
Only if they refuse shelter, right, Robert?
if well, if they have an alternative place to go, and we would do that outreach to them, and they decline that, then they would be subject to the time, place, manner regulations, and Shane, it does prohibit the use of a gas heater or a fire. And I think that's also, to get at your question, that's the reason the city is putting so much work into the temporary alternative shelter locations. These other sites like we're seeing in Southeast Portland, to provide these sanctioned areas where people can go in exactly the situation you're describing. And so that's why that effort is also, I think, important and part of the city's strategy.
Understood.
Shane,
So that, hold on. So that might be part of the city's strategy, but last we checked, you guys have 1 camp that might be open in July, which could accommodate up to 150 people. So what's a reasonable timeline for seeing these other temporary alternative shelter sites open up that could provide these people currently on the street an actual place to go?
Yeah, and we're working on a second site that we'll announce pretty soon, but not ready to announce that publicly yet. I will just also say, when there's severe weather, I think you're all probably aware, we suspend a lot of our camping work and actually just turn to do outreach and making sure folks know where the severe weather shelters are in the summer and the winter. And so that's been a part of city policy for a long time. I don't anticipate that changing at all.
And the temporary alternative shelter sites are just one option as well. We have Safe Rest Villages and other county offered shelters that we refer people to all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, I have another kind of hypothetical, and this may have kind of been addressed earlier, but I just want to get it, make sure I clearly understand it. So as you mentioned, and as we know, there are people who, when they're offered a space in a shelter, they may refuse for one reason or another. Maybe they feel unsafe there, who knows? That's their prerogative. It sounds like these are folks who you will deem voluntarily homeless. I'm curious, in the situation when there really isn't, like, I know there are sometimes moments where there really just aren't places that have beds open, maybe a Safe Rest Village, there isn't space there, these shelters aren't open, these outdoor shelters aren't open yet, there just isn't availability, or it will take, quite some time, maybe someone's on a waiting list to get there. Thus leaving someone to remain, I guess, illegally camping in public without any other option. Will that person also be ticketed and threatened with a fine or time in jail, even if there are not any options available to them?
No, they would just need to adhere to the time, place, and manner restrictions that are outlined in this code.
All right, even if this is the middle of the day, then
they can go to a day center or the library or one of the other services, or be anywhere else. They can even just be on the sidewalk, but they just can't have the structure erected.
All right, got it.
Robert, I don't know if there's something else you wanted to add.
Oh, and I just wanted to I think add some context for Alex's question, that this concept of being involuntarily homeless, that's a concept that really comes out of the Martin decision. And for the Eighth Amendment purposes under the US Constitution, if you're involuntarily homeless, meaning you don't have anywhere else to go, then you have the Eighth Amendment right to be somewhere in the city to sleep that night. Now, within that Eighth Amendment right to be somewhere to sleep that night, the city can still require you to adhere to time, place, manner regulations. But that concept in the ordinance of involuntarily homeless, that's a concept that comes from the Ninth Circuit and their case law.
Thanks, Robert.
And we have
Okay.
just a few minutes left. So we'll go to UK and then we've got to wrap it up here, but you guys can always follow up with us in our media inbox, of course.
Yeah, kind of, I guess, related to Alex's question. So, I mean, for like, say somebody has a pet, somebody has a partner who couldn't be brought to a particular shelter they're being offered. They have too much stuff, they have too many belongings to bring to a shelter. What is going to be the process for people who, now technically they could go to a shelter, but their circumstances don't really put them in a position to do so? Which side of that is the city going to lean toward when deciding whether or not somebody is voluntarily or involuntarily homeless?
Yeah, okay, thanks for that question. I think, we already try to provide as many services as we can, and we're actually expanding that. So one of the discussions with providers was adding day center locations or day storage locations and day center locations. So we already have a day storage facility in downtown by the waterfront, but adding one maybe to the east side as well, because people use that to store belongings during the day. We also store belongings for 30 days, and we'll store it longer if folks ask us to. At our storage facility that the city provides and secures. And then also working with, obviously, Multnomah County and the state and just different providers on increasing the joint office, obviously, of homeless services as well. On increasing those different resources.
I'm sorry, but that's not what I'm asking you. I understand that there are efforts underway to expand services for folks with pets or partners or too much stuff, or they're disabled or whatever the case may be. I'm talking about right now, right? When this goes into effect, if it goes into effect, and there is that kind of individual circumstance where technically they could go to a shelter, but they'd leave their pet, partner, or belongings behind. What is the city going to do now with that?
Yeah, so that's why I mentioned it's going to be phased in. We're not flipping a switch and then enforcing it on folks right away. So this will be education on the ground. What services can we offer you right now? I can tell you the outreach workers connect folks with the appropriate kind of services for them. So that's why the Safe Rest Village that came online last week is a great option with 2 dog runs and the availability for partners on site. But to your point, there's still things coming online that aren't online yet. And so part of this process is to phase in that enforcement and not just flip a switch on July 1 and enforce it on folks who need maybe a little more time to connect with the different service providers and different options.
Okay, thank you. And then this one might be more for Mayor Wheeler, but why introduce criminal and civil penalties at all? I mean, if the goal here is to reduce homelessness or reduce, the visibility of homelessness, how is that achieved, I guess, by fining people or putting them in jail, other than, I guess, temporarily they're not on the streets? Like, why is that the enforcement mechanism, or the main goal here seems to be to create these legal and these legal penalties for folks on the streets? Why is that?
I mean, the reason we put the warning system in place is to not jump immediately to that. A lot of city code would have kind of that third violation as the first step. So we're building in kind of a warning system, connecting folks with services, trying to make sure as part of our education that PPV would call outreach workers to actually do those kind of referral processes, because we know folks would actually respond better to those outreach workers instead. So part of that process that we've built in is because we don't want to jump right to finding people or putting people in jail.
So with that being the case, as you just acknowledged that people are not likely to respond well to law enforcement and generally will do better with, outreach workers. Why is it that the first step here is to get cops out to warn people?
It's not the first step, it's just what's acknowledged in the code. So we don't have, a section for, in practice, a PPB will call an outreach worker, but we don't have that written out, but that is what's going to happen in practice. That's part of that education piece that I keep mentioning, because it's very important that we figure out what the standard operating procedures are with respect to the code. This code is just the change in the actual city code to get in compliance with the law.
Okay, and if that is the process that the city intends to follow, why wouldn't y'all write that into this city code?
We don't write standard operating procedures into city code. Those are, this is the law, and then there's also the policies. So we're putting the standard operating procedures as part of that education process, for what folks can do on the ground, what services they can provide. Those things change regularly. So making sure we have a clear list of all the services available and the shelters available every day. That's part of what the MAC group's doing with all the data gathering and making sure there's, one system that folks can access so they know where they can and can't go, and what outreach workers know where people can and can't go.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sky. All right, guys, we have to tie this up or wrap it up here. Sky's got another meeting. I just sent the ordinance, so a copy to everybody's inbox. So you guys should have a copy of it. We sent a press release. If you guys have any other follow-up questions, just reach out. And this will come to council on Wednesday. So there'll be more engagement then. Thanks, Sky, and thanks, Robert, for your time. And thanks for everybody for showing up to get some background info. I hope it was helpful. I know it's a lot of information, so I just thought this would be a helpful exercise to get to know this, because it's a lot of material. So let me know if you like it or didn't like it, but that's it. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for making yourselves available today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
for